I worked the Graywell disappearance ledger for 3 years before I understood what I was actually counting. My title was Frontier Welfare Analyst, Colonial Accounts Division, and my job was numbers. Miners who didn't report for shift change, survey techs who walked into the dust flats and didn't walk back, children logged absent from settlement schools with no body and no signal trace. For 3 years I filed them under cause unknown, the way the office had always filed them, because Graywell was a hard moon, and hard moons swallow people. That was the explanation I was handed, and the explanation I gave to families standing at my desk, asking why their daughter's file had gone quiet. I remember a man named Ferris Kale, a claims foreman from the Southern Dig, who came in every 6 weeks for 2 years, asking after his sister, and left every time with the same closed file and the same flat thank you, because that was all I had to give him. Then the count crossed 1,400, and I stopped believing in hard moons. I built a map instead of a ledger. Every disappearance, plotted by date and depth and distance from the old seismic fault that ran under the southern claims. The pattern wasn't random. It pulled toward one unmapped fracture 9 kilometers down, a structure our scans had always read as dead rock, stable, uninteresting, the kind of formation nobody requisitions a survey budget to look at twice. I requisitioned a drone against 3 different supervisors' objections, logged it as a routine seismic check so the request wouldn't sit in a queue for a month, and sent it down the fracture myself, alone, on a night shift, because by then, I didn't trust the request to survive contact with anyone else's judgment. What it found wasn't dead rock. It was a sanctum, grown rather than built, walls the color of old bone, veined through with something that pulsed on a slow rhythm like a held breath. Inside it, row after row of cradles, not graves, cradles, shaped to the body, each one holding a colonist from my ledger, alive, suspended, eyes closed, their chests rising on a rhythm too slow to be sleep, their bodies wired into a webbing that drew light and color from them the way a root draws water. I recognized 11 of them by name before I had to stop the feed and breathe. Ferris Kale's sister was in the 4th row. I marked the timestamp, logged the coordinates, and did not tell him yet, because I didn't know yet whether I was bringing him news of his sister or a confirmation of exactly the kind of loss he'd already spent 2 years preparing for. We learned the rest from the thing we pulled out of the access shaft 3 nights later, a Kindred scout, wounded, sealed in an exoskin, built to pass for human-shaped debris in low light, the kind of disguise that only works if nobody is looking closely. We held it in a cell on the orbital station, no windows, white walls, a chair bolted to the floor across from another chair bolted to the floor. I sat in the second chair because no one else in the building had read every page of the file the way I had, and because I wanted it to answer to someone who could put a name to every cradle it had filled. It did not lie to me. That was almost the worst part. It told me, in the flat translated cadence our linguists' boxes gave every Kindred voice, that its people had slept beneath Graywell for longer than my species had existed, riding out an age their ancestors had judged unsurvivable on the surface. It told me the sleep had run long past its calculated end, that their own gestation lines had failed centuries ago in the dark, and that they had needed living hosts to carry their dormant young back into viability before the line was lost entirely. It told me human biology had proven, in its own words, sufficiently compatible. It used that phrase twice, sufficiently compatible. It did not apologize, because in its accounting there was nothing to apologize for. We were proximate resource, the way a hard moon is proximate rock, the way a seam of ore is proximate to whoever needs it. I asked how many cradles were active. It told me, 1,406. Every name on my ledger accounted for in a single number. I asked how long until the first generation woke. It told me that too, and the number was small enough that I had to set my data slate face down on the table before my hand started shaking in front of it. I filed my report at 0340 station time. I did not soften it, and I did not pad it with caveats or recommendations for further study. I wrote the count, the depth, the wake window, and the word cradles, because that was the precise word, and precision was the only thing I had left to offer the 1,400 names on my ledger. I sent it up the chain, expecting weeks of review committees, hedged language, a request for a second survey to confirm the first. It took 4 hours. By morning, the Cradlebreaker was already assembling in high orbit, and nobody above me asked whether we should negotiate, quarantine, or wait for more data. There was no debate to sit in on. The decision had already been made the moment the word cradles left my report. Not in anger, not as a vote, but as the only conclusion the facts supported once they were stated plainly. 3 strike carriers, a deep-bore element built for exactly this kind of buried structure, because someone, somewhere, years before any of us had heard of Graywell, had already imagined a day the fleet might need to go straight down instead of straight in. A containment shell, wide enough to seal the fracture from the surface down to bedrock. Admiral Yusuke Mara ran the operation from the lead carrier and asked me exactly 2 questions. Was the wake window confirmed, and was there any chamber in that sanctum that held something other than a cradle? I told her no, and no. She thanked me, and that was the entire conversation. No speeches, no declarations sent down to the Kindred above their own sealed sanctum, warning them, giving them a chance to answer for what we'd found. There was nothing left to say to something that had already explained itself without remorse, twice, in the same flat sentence. I went down with the ground element because I was the only person who'd seen the cradle rows on a live feed and could tell the breach team which corridor was the false one, the one the scans still read as solid rock. We came up through the access shaft at first light, Graywell's pale sun throwing long, flat shadows across the dust flats, the kind of clean, ordinary daylight that made the whole moon feel briefly, falsely safe, the way a quiet street feels safe right before you learn what's been living under it. The deep-bore team had already cut the primary seal by the time I reached the surface marker. I went down behind them with 2 medics and a recovery sled, because some of the 1,400 were still alive in those cradles, and somebody had to be the one who carried them out by name instead of by case number. We brought up 311. Ferris Cale's sister was not among them. The sanctum's own systems had already converted her, and the rest we lost, past the point of recovery, their bodies kept only as long as the gestation required, and discarded the moment the Kindred decided otherwise. I do not have a softer way to say that, and I am done looking for one. The strike itself took 11 minutes once the seal was confirmed clear of every recoverable colonist. The containment shell closed over the fracture mouth, and the deep-bore charges did the rest. Not a bombardment, not fire raining down from orbit, just a precise, engineered collapse that filled every chamber, every cradle, every dormant nursery the Kindred had built across 4 centuries of patient waiting, with inert stone, floor to ceiling, all at once. No broadcast, no ultimatum sent down to something that had already told us, calmly and without prompting, exactly what it intended to do with us. We didn't owe it a warning. We owed the 311 survivors a moon they could stand on, without wondering what was still breathing 9 kilometers under their boots. I flew home over the dust flats afterward, and watched the daylight sit ordinary and unbothered on a moon that no longer had anything alive underneath it. Graywell's revival ended that morning, completely, the way it had to. I found Ferris Cale myself 2 days later and told him where his sister had been and what we had done about it, and he didn't ask me to soften that either. I closed my ledger that night for the first time in 3 years with every name accounted for, one way or another. We did not leave the hollow Kindred a single cradle to wake into.